Hi, mystery writers. Welcome to Write a Killer Mystery, where we talk about making a good mystery great. My name is Zara Altair, and today we're going to talk about starting your mystery, the first chapter, and we're going to focus on some mistakes you want to avoid. First, I want to thank my patrons on Patreon for their continued support of this channel, Write a Killer Mystery. And if you'd like to support us, there's a link in the description below. Okay, so let's continue on with starting that first chapter of your mystery. And I want to go back to what you should be thinking about when you start, which is the plot of your entire story. Because as I mentioned last week, that first chapter is a great place to set up hints at what's going to be happening later in the story. So that plot is what drives your mystery and keeps your readers reading, and it creates a strong central mystery and keeps that pace going. And so you want to make sure you have a really strong mystery, that your victim is worthy of death and that your villain is worthy of being captured and identified. All right, you want to keep the pace fast. You want to have twists, turns, obstacles for your sleuth. You want well-rounded characters, and you can use subplots to add interest and deepen the mystery, and you can create a sense of urgency for the protagonist and for the reader. And you want to end the novel with that satisfying reveal, that conclusion where your reader goes, I should have guessed that, but I didn't. So you want to plunge your reader into the story and hint at the plot to come when you begin your chapter. And to keep your readers engaged, you want to create those relatable characters they can relate to. You want that crime to be compelling. You want to keep the pace going, and you want to build tension and suspense to keep your readers turning those pages. And you want to write in a style that's engaging and easy to read. And as I mentioned last week, you want to make sure that the style at your beginning is the style that you continue through the rest of your story. It's like switch and bait. If you start with one style and then switch to another through the rest of the story. So let's talk about some first chapter flops and how you can avoid them. And they're common mistakes that happen with beginning writers. So the first chapter of your mystery is critical to engaging your reader and drawing them into the story. However, many first-time mystery writers make common mistakes that can quickly turn off a reader and sabotage your chances as a writer of success. So let's look at some of those common mistakes. First of all, you can start with a dull and uninteresting scene. And I mentioned last week about, your detective getting up, having breakfast, nothing's really happening. And this is a vision that is often mistaken for the protagonist's everyday life, but that's not what it means. It means that they're in that life and something happens, all right? Another thing that can happen is right at the beginning, you want to keep the focus on just a couple of main characters. So you have the rest of the novel to introduce a lot of other characters, but at the beginning, get your reader focused on your detective and help them relate to your detective and care about them, so they'll care about this person they're following through the rest of your mystery to solve the crime. Another thing that can happen is you can make the crime too obvious too soon. So you can take your time. You have a whole novel to tell your story, and oftentimes the crime doesn't happen till maybe a quarter of the way into the book. And another thing that can happen is being really heavy-handed with clues and foreshadowing. Remember, you can trust your readers. They're mystery readers. They're going to be looking for those clues, so you don't need to make your clues obvious. You can go ahead and hide them, and we've talked about hiding your clues before. And then really important is right at the beginning, you really want to hook your reader into the story. That's why having your protagonist deal with some minor conflict, it's not the big mystery of the story, but a minor conflict. It's like your reader's going to wonder, well, so who is this character and how are they going to deal with this situation? And that brings your reader into your story and gets them engaged with your protagonist. All right. So you want to avoid those common mistakes. And then I have a list of what I call the don't do it mistake. I mean, just don't even think about doing them. All right. You want that first chapter to be lean and stay with the story. So first time novelists often tell too much at the beginning, and you have that entire novel, as I said before, to add a lot of details. So let's look at some of these mistakes that you just don't want to do. All right. That is starting too early. Your reader wants the story, so introduce your sleuth doing something. Give your reader some action. Waking up, taking a shower, eating breakfast is starting too early. At this point, your reader doesn't care about your protagonist waking up and taking a shower. Just leave it out. If your sleuth's morning ritual is important to the story, bring it in later in the story. Right here at the beginning, you just want to get your reader into that story. You want to get them in and involved, all right? On the other hand, there's something where the protagonist's whole life is revealed before you get to the story. It's like, oh, I've got to tell you all these things about my cool detective. So don't do that either. It's called backstory, and your readers don't need to know right away all that backstory, the major childhood trauma, whatever it is. You can sprinkle in those details later. At the beginning, you want to jump right into the story and get going. If those backstory details are necessary, once again, bring them in later, but not in that first chapter. All right? All right. You can start adding backstory in the first part of Act 2. That's a good place to start adding the backstory. First, you want to pull your reader into the story. All right? Another is really super long descriptions. We don't need that either. Setting is really important, and yes, as I mentioned last week, you want to let the readers know where they are in space and in time, but what you want at the beginning is action. So get the reader into the story before you add descriptive passages about the city they live in or the weather or any of those things. Those are short things at the beginning. If you want longer descriptions, save them till later. First, get your reader into the story, all right? And then the big no-no is the mirror. Your protagonist looks in the mirror and they're tall, dark, and handsome, or whatever they are. Just if you're tempted to show your protagonist in the mirror, cut it out. Just cut it out. So if there's something like maybe your sleuth has a disability like a limp or something like that. Bring it into the context of that conflict that they're dealing with at the beginning of the story, rather than looking in the mirror and thinking about themselves. All right. And then another one is a gratuitous sex scene. If your novel isn't about sex scenes and you think that you're hooking the reader by giving them this sexy sex scene at the beginning and the rest of your story is just a traditional mystery, that doesn't work either. As I said, you want to set the tone of your story from the very beginning. All right. Your first chapter, you really want to focus on the story, and you'll avoid these mistakes. And in addition to avoiding these first chapter mistakes, let's just review some of the things you should be doing at the beginning. You want to start with a hook that brings the reader into the story and sets the tone of the story. You want to introduce your protagonist sleuth and make them relatable and likable. There's something about your character that makes them very relatable, and your reader's going to empathize with them. All right. And you want to give the reader a glimpse of the world and the setting so they know where they are and they know that world that your detective moves in. And you want to have some tension right there at the beginning. That's why you have a conflict. There's this thing that's happening that your detective doesn't want to do, or they're tripped up, or they're settling an argument. There's just so many ways that you can showcase your detective and their skills right at the beginning, so your reader gets a taste of the protagonist, because your protagonist is really their guide through the whole entire mystery and solving that mystery puzzle. And another thing you can do, and this is why knowing at least the outline of your story helps when you're writing that first chapter, is you can foreshadow events that will unfold later. And I know that there are discovery writers, pantsers, if you will, who go back to that first chapter after they've written their story and make sure they have some of those hints and foreshadowings in the first part of their story. All right. So by following these tips and avoiding those common mistakes, you can write a first chapter that will engage your reader and keep them reading and get them to care about the story enough to keep reading. All right. So get ready to write that first chapter that'll make your reader want to finish your story. Okay, that's it. I hope that helps. Just avoid those biggies of don't do it, and keep going with your story. And if you are a discovery writer, you can come back and fine-tune that first chapter later when the story is finished. And as I mentioned last week, you're probably going to be working on that first sentence for the entire time you're writing the novel. So just as you have the whole novel to put in all the details, you have the whole time that you're writing your novel to add little details to that first chapter. You're taking your reader on a problem-solving adventure. That's what you want to do. So you want to set them up at the beginning to let them know that this is a problem-solving adventure and this is the way you tell a story. Okay, I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. And once again, I want to mention that Audible is a sponsor for Write a Killer Mystery. And if you haven't experienced listening to books read by narrators, it's a really fun way to experience books. And there's a link to a 30-day free trial in the description below. So thanks so much, and I will see you next time. Keep writing.